The most dangerous thoughts aren't the ones you notice. They're the ones that you believe so deeply you never even question them. Because when a thought is repeated enough times, well, your brain stops seeing it as a thought and starts seeing it as a fact. Over time, those thoughts end up quietly shaping your decisions, your behaviors, your confidence, and ultimately the life you create. And so in this video, I want to share with you 3 subconscious thoughts that might be quietly ruining your life without you even realizing it. And so the first thought is, I always need to be doing something. Because we live in a world where being constantly busy has become the new normal. When we're not working, we're consuming. When we're not consuming, we're distracting ourselves. And for many of us, spare moments in our day are no longer moments to simply exist, but they're moments that we feel the need to fill. In fact, many of us feel guilty if we sit there and do nothing, because unconsciously we've started to believe that if we're not doing something, then we're wasting our time. For example, maybe you're a mother who always feels like there's an endless to-do list. Or maybe you're an ambitious person who always feels like you have to be learning something, have to be watching more self-improvement content. However, the problem is, every time we respond to that feeling of guilt by keeping ourselves busy, well, we reinforce the belief that I should always be doing something. Before we know it, we end up trapped in a cycle where the more uncomfortable stillness feels, the more we keep ourselves busy. And the busier we become, the harder it becomes to slow down. And this is where it starts to become a real problem, because over time, this constant state of doing ends up leaving our nervous systems dysregulated. We end up constantly moving from one thing to the next, living from a place of reaction rather than intention. Suddenly, it's like we're no longer consciously choosing how we spend our time, but instead we're simply reacting to whatever demands our attention. And I see this in a lot of the high achieving people that I work with. You know, some are doctors, some are surgeons, some are very successful professionals, but yet they still struggle in some areas of their life. And often it's because they're so used to constantly being busy, constantly doing, that they never allow themselves moments to slow down and reflect and intentionally work on the areas that need their attention. And so here's something you need to understand, but being busy and being productive are not always the same thing. In fact, sometimes we can spend our entire day moving from one task to the next, yet never actually focusing on anything that actually matters. Right? If you're being completely honest with yourself, how often do you spend parts of your day caught in distractions without you even thinking about it? Because a lot of people will say, oh, I don't have the time to look after myself, or I don't have the time for important things. But in reality, they're just addicted to keeping busy with things that don't matter. They have no control over their attention, which means they end up living from a place of reaction, and now they're not consciously choosing how they spend their time. And so constantly doing creates a chaotic mind, which leads to reactive choices. Because the truth is, our minds were never made to be on all the time with no space to rest. And so sometimes the most productive thing you can do is learn how to slow down. Because when you learn how to be, well, this gives you the space to reconnect with yourself. It gives your mind the time to rest, and now you can make more intentional choices. And so instead of filling every quiet moment of your day with doing, start practice being. No more automatically reaching for your phone every time you're in a queue. No need to listen to a podcast every time you go for a walk. Allow yourself to experience moments of the day where you just be. Constantly doing more doesn't always mean you're moving forward, because sometimes slowing down is the very thing that allows you to see clearly, make better decisions, and move in the direction that actually matters. But let's get into thought number 2. My happiness is selfish. Now, most people might not consciously say that to themselves, but subconsciously, many of us carry this belief without even realizing it. For example, it can show up in ways such as feeling guilty for having a good day when someone close to you was struggling. Or maybe you feel uncomfortable celebrating your own success because someone else hasn't reached theirs yet. Or you constantly prioritize someone else's needs while ignoring your own. It's like somewhere along the way we have picked up the belief that happiness is something we have to earn, or our joy somehow takes away from someone else. Or maybe we believe that other people are far more important than us. In fact, our culture often sends us the message that selflessness is what makes someone a good person, while prioritizing yourself is seen as selfish. Now, of course, I'm not saying being selfless is bad. In fact, it's a beautiful thing. But if it constantly comes at the expense of yourself, at the expense of your well-being, at the expense of your joy, that's when it becomes a problem. In fact, we're rarely taught that taking care of ourselves is also part of being able to show up for the people we care about, right? Because if you're constantly giving to others without ever taking the time to care for yourself, well, eventually you just become mentally and emotionally exhausted. And when you're in this state, well, this doesn't help anybody. Not you, not the people around you, not the world. One of the biggest mindset shifts that I ever had was that self-love is a service to the world. Personally, I grew up as a people pleaser. That was a pattern of my childhood. And I learned through the role modeling of my parents that sacrificing myself for others was a good thing to do, even if it came at the expense of my happiness, of what I wanted, of what I cared about. And this is a very toxic, dysfunctional behavior, which many of us think is love. Because even though part of us might think that we're doing good, and it might come from a good place, the truth is we are hurting ourselves far more than realize, because we're abandoning ourselves. And this can lead to so many problems such as depression, anxiety, becoming burnt out, being physically exhausted. And so I had to relearn that the best form of love is when I give everything I need to myself, so that when I'm overflowing, I have more energy to give to others, because self-love is a service to the world. Like, your energy is contagious. When you are feeling good in yourself, when you are looking after yourself physically and mentally, you are going to feel so good, and that is naturally going to overflow into the people around you. The way you carry yourself, the way you speak, your mood, you will uplift a room. That is far more valuable and impactful than this toxic pattern where you're only able to give scraps of yourself to people because deep down inside you're mentally exhausted and you're not even truthfully happy, and you have resentment and guilt. When you allow yourself to be happy right now, no matter who is around you, no matter what is going on in the world, you lift the world up. Because when you feel good, you actually show up with true compassion and true patience, and you can actually give people your full attention. However, when you keep abandoning yourself and you're mentally exhausted, you're saying yes to things you don't want to do, and you're burnt out, this is a disservice to everybody. And so you don't help others by dimming yourself, but you help others by allowing yourself to experience joy, to take care of yourself and show up from a place of energy rather than exhaustion. And by the way, if you're finding this video useful, please consider subscribing. This channel is all about helping you understand your mind and become the person you want to be, and so I'd love to have you as part of this community. Now, the third thought is I'm behind in life, and I think this is a very common one, because a lot of people subconsciously believe that life has a checklist. You know, by this age I should have this amount of money, by this age I should be married, by this age I have a certain career. But the interesting thing is that these timelines aren't created by us, but they're absorbed from our society, our culture, family expectations, and the things we see online. However, the problem is when we measure our lives against these timelines, we start judging ourselves against a standard that we never consciously chose. We start believing that because we haven't reached a certain milestone by a certain age, well, we're falling behind. But behind who, and according to whose timeline? And this is where comparison becomes so damaging, because it's built on incomplete information, right? You're comparing everything you know about yourself, your doubts, your struggles, your setbacks, and everything behind the scenes to a limited version of someone else's life that they choose to show you. And so your mind takes this incomplete information and turns it into a conclusion. It creates the illusion that you're seeing the full picture when you're only seeing a small part of someone else's reality. And so of course you're going to feel like you're behind, because it's a trap. And I see this again and again with the people I work with. And they're all in completely different stages. Some have partners, some don't. Some have very successful careers. Some are still figuring out their next steps. Some are still living with their family. Some are by themselves. But what's interesting is that despite being in different circumstances, they all still carry the same belief. I'm behind in life. And so isn't that interesting that another person can look at someone's life and think they have what I'm missing, and that same person is looking at someone else's life thinking the exact same thing. And so can't you see the trap? It's almost as if this timeline is completely made up, because this shows that the problem isn't always their circumstance, but the problem is the meaning they're attaching to those circumstances and what their mind is choosing to focus on. And I get it, I've experienced this myself. Trust me, I'm an outcast to society. I have not lived a normal life. And currently I'm 27 years old and I've never been in a proper relationship. And of course, if I was to sit here and compare my life to the timeline that society created, of course I'm going to feel behind. I'm going to feel like maybe there's something wrong with me. But when I look at the bigger picture, I realize that that thought is based on a timeline that I didn't consciously choose. It's based on expectations I've absorbed of where I'm supposed to be. But I've personally learned how to not give my energy and attention to those things. I don't focus on anybody else's life. I don't focus on the timeline that society has created. And I'm instead focused on being present in my own. And so instead of using my energy to worry, or my energy to sit here and ruminate and tell myself how everything is wrong with me, why hasn't this happened, where is this person, instead of doing that, I direct my energy and my attention to important things in my life, like my work, or like my creating videos. The best thing I ever did for me was delete my social media and come back to presence, coming back to just focusing on my path. And this is why I'm a big believer that you have to be so careful with what you consume, because many people every day are giving their attention to other people's lives, just scrolling through other people's lives. And of course, if that is where you are placing your attention, that is going to feed all of these thoughts of comparison. And so the moment you stop measuring your life against someone else's timeline, well, the moment you finally give yourself the space and permission to be happy in your own. Because I can promise you, for a lot of people out there, there's actually so much in their life that they can be happy with. There's so much to appreciate, but they just don't see it, because their mind is too focused on what they don't have. And so come back to the presence of your own life. Come back to gratitude, and come back to trusting that your life is unfolding in its own time, and you are on your own journey, because there's 8 billion people on this planet, and none of our lives look the same. I hope this video could have helped. Click here to learn how to gaslight your brain into success, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.